Iconic Talk. This is your community's podcast with conversations about real estate, local happenings, and all things Winchester, Virginia. I'm Mark Francis, a local realtor, broker, and owner at Icon Real Estates.
And I'm Megan Eanes, a local realtor and part of the Icon Real Estate team. Mark and I are so excited to share everything that we love about Winchester, Virginia with you. We want you to be an informed, savvy real estate consumer in today's ever-changing market.
Yep, if you want local knowledge, you've come to the right place. Welcome to March. We are here, and isn't it almost daylight savings time going to come back?
I think it's coming soon.
It is coming soon.
I'm so excited. I know it's going to be here before April.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
I don't know why I brought that up, and I don't even know what date is. I think it's next week, isn't it?
I don't know, but I hope so. The sooner the better.
There's something about just the daylight and seeing the sunlight longer, later, makes you feel,
Yeah, totally feel better. And I'm not a fan of the daylight savings time thing.
Yeah, well, it is next week. I mean, it's going to be not this weekend, but the following weekend.
Okay.
It'll be ready to go. I mean, I always say it's a Saturday, but then technically it's a Sunday.
Right.
So, yeah, on that March 11th, 12th time frame.
Oh, yeah,
there
exciting.
You go.
So we're just not that far away.
Not that far away.
So it sounds like we both had some very exciting weekends going on with sports in our family. So you had Hanley States for indoor track, was it?
States indoor track, and the team did amazing. My son ran in two different meets. One was a 4x800 relay where the team came in fourth in the state. And then he also ran the 3200 race, which is basically 2 miles, 16 times around the track for an indoor track.
Oh, goodness.
And came in 11th place in the state, got a personal record called a PR in that world. He won't mind me bragging about his time, 9:44.
For 2 miles?
But yeah.
Oh, my God.
Insane, right? Right. And the cool thing about that race was Pierce also trains with two amazing junior runners who have always been tops in the state. Well, they ran a tandem kind of tag team. I'm gonna stream right behind you like a bike cyclist to kind of catch a draft. They did that 2 laps at a time, had a complete strategy, and then with like 3 or 4 laps left, they kind of split up. But they got first and second place in the state.
That is so awesome.
So I'm bragging about Hanley for all the people out there. And James Wood, there's a runner for him that he came in, I think it was 3rd or 4th. So it was amazing space
Great
for the
show
for the
the community.
And there was plenty.
Awesome.
Trust me, there's plenty other runners as well who did short distance things. There is, I think, 3rd place for a couple of girls. Teams finished really strong. So yeah, it was a good overall track experience. But it's indoor track, so it's almost like the preliminary just trainings for outdoor track.
Right.
So
that should be starting sometime this month,
it's
won't it?
nonstop.
The end of March?
You got it. Nonstop.
So I was in
you?
Stafford for the weekend for my daughter Molly's championship swim meet for her short course season, and it was amazing. Don't know if I've ever been more proud of her. And
awesome.
She was awesome. She ended up making it to finals in 7 of her 8 events. The one event that she didn't make it in, I don't think she was too upset. It was a 100 fly, and anybody that knows anything about swimming, that event is not easy.
That's a killer, right?
And if you make it to finals, you got to do it again. So, but to make it to finals in 7 out of her 8 events was just awesome. And her whole team, Valley Swim Team, Phoenix, just did an amazing job out of Strasburg.
That's
and
cool.
They're just such a great little family. So I'm so proud of them and her. But it was
and
a long
she seems like
weekend.
she's getting more into it as well, right?
She is.
She's getting more invested in the sport, and as she gets success, she's liking it.
It's funny because we were talking about my father-in-law lives in Stafford, so we were talking about either getting up early and going Friday morning for the meet, or going Thursday night and staying. So we didn't have to get up as early. And I asked her, I said, "What do you want to do?" "Well, we'll let you make the decision." And she said, "Well, I want to sleep in my own bed tonight," but she said, "The swimmer and me, I know I need to get more rest, and I'll get more rest at Granddad's, so we're gonna go."
Wow!
So we left Thursday night for the swimmer and her.
Yep.
So I was she's really thinking about things from a whole other perspective, and I see her going pretty far in this. She's
nice.
I'm just so impressed by her. So proud of her and the whole team.
Well, my runner, I see a little bit of evolution as well over his pretty short running career. Started his right pre-pandemic, his freshman year, he started indoor track, and he was a soccer player before. Now he's track, at the time, he didn't even understand pacing. He didn't understand times. He just like, I'm just going out there and running. Now he knows exactly his pace. He knows his distances of what he's good at. And when he came home from the track meet, he's starving. He'll eat any old junk food. He's like, I'm trying to be good. I don't want to eat unhealthily, tonight and not let my body digest it. I'm having a banana and some yogurt, and then I'm going to go to bed instead of just pounding burger and fries and pizza or whatever it would have been.
Oh, Molly came home 2 weeks ago from practice, and she said, Coach says we need to lay off the sweets for the next 2 weeks, and she likes her sweets, and she didn't have anything. I mean, I was really impressed by that. And we have a famous Phoenix swim team pasta salad that we make for our swim meets, so I had made that for her, and she typically has it in the refrigerator at all times, and then we take it, and she has it at the swim meets so that she can eat it. So she really has turned a corner. I mean, she's always loved it, but now it's just, I think she's diving in. This is her thing, and she knows it.
Yeah. Well, the other cool thing about sports like this is that, they get a chance to read about themselves in the paper.
Right.
That's something that always, it's like you go straight to it. And on Wednesday after the race, his name's in the paper and it talks about all that. So you can go back, if you're listening to yesterday's paper, you'll see some of the results of what I'm talking about. You guys can have the same thing. But the Winchester Star does a great job for student athletes in our town and how they spotlight kids all the time.
Yeah, different kids, different sports.
Kids, and they get a chance to interview them, and so you get the flair of what's happening in your town, in your community, and even in your own family. So we're parents bragging about our kids.
Right.
It happens all the time, and you can brag more when they get their picture in the paper.
And you can brag more when you have a podcast.
You can. Yes, exactly. And so there's all kinds of opportunities that, the kids have to just celebrate their successes and just sending a newspaper clipping to family around the country or around the state is kind of always a fun thing.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, the newspaper has value. I 100% agree with that. And I love being able to use it for that resource, to be able to see what our kids are doing, but also, to see what's going on in our community. I mean, our local newspaper, I think it's been around for, I don't even know how many years at this point in time, a really long time. But we're lucky to have it. And
is it going out of style? We don't know. But we will have an interview guest with us here very shortly who is going to answer that question and more. It's where you get a chance to learn some of the behind-the-scenes life as a Winchester Star journalist. His name is Joe LaFave, and he came here to town recently within the last 4 or 5 years, but he has gotten plugged into the community and loves it just as much as you and I do. So here's our chat with journalists from the Winchester Star, and he is a great guy. You'll learn a lot. Joe LaFave. Well, we're here with Joe LaFave, journalist from Winchester Star. How are you?
Good to be here.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thanks so much. It's so cool because we love talking about all things Winchester, and there's hardly anyone that does it better than Winchester Star. I mean, they get out there and they see the sights and tell us what's going on in town. So,
yeah, it's a good paper. It's owned by Ogden Media, which is a company that's based out of Wheeling, West Virginia. So they kind of own a large share of small town, 10 to 15,000 circulation newspapers. So I used to work for them in Martinsburg, West Virginia, when my wife and I first moved up here, and then I went to go work for National Guard magazine, and then I came back to work for them. September, October of last year. So I work, so I freelance for both the Winchester Star and for the Northern Virginia Daily. It's the same editorial staff for the most part.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, which is nice. It gives us a lot of opportunity to pursue different stories. Like I have a huge area to cover, pretty much from Linden to Clearbrook.
Yeah.
That kind of L and everything in between. When I worked at the Journal in Martinsburg, I covered Jefferson County and specifically Jefferson County.
Yep.
So it's really nice to have so much flexibility of area to explore things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, but go back a little bit here and tell us how, where you came from, how you came up here, how you got into the business, where you started, school, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'm actually so I was born right outside New Orleans, but I grew up in Florida. A little town called Cocoa Beach.
I actually have family there.
Oh, do you really? Excellent. Yeah, home of Kelly Slater. Went to Florida State for undergrad in criminology. While I was there, I joined the Midway Fire Department. and then got my EMT license over the summer. So as I was in college, I also worked for the fire department and then in the emergency room. And then when I graduated for the ambulance, and then I did that for about 2 years and went after that to go work for an aerospace company in Mississippi. And while I was there, I was living in New Orleans, and I met my now wife. And when she got into school in Shreveport, I followed her up there. And then that's kind of where I started my journalism career, I guess.
So how did you get to journalism from that?
Right, definitely from criminology and EMT to journalism.
Yeah.
So I was always a real big fan of reading, especially narrative nonfiction. And it's funny, when I was 10, it was the year 2000, and the movie Black Hawk Down came out. And I was, as a 10-year-old boy, I just really wanted to see this movie. It looked amazing, Ridley Scott. Mm-hmm. And my mom was like, that looks pretty violent. I don't think so. But she said, hey, if you want, you can read the book. It's a real thick book by a guy named Mark Bowden, who, in my opinion, is one of the best investigative reporters and nonfiction, authors out there. So I read Black Hawk Down and got me hooked on narrative nonfiction. I mean, even at 10 years old, it was probably a little bit of an extreme book to read as a 10-year-old. But it really got me into that. So I've always been a lifelong reader and enjoyer of nonfiction work. But when I was in Shreveport, my wife was in school, and I was working a full-time job, and her school was very diligent, or it took a lot of time. So I had a lot of free time.
Yeah.
So I started writing fiction because I have pretty bad ADD, so I always am daydreaming. So
And then you're just writing it all down.
Yeah. So I started writing it down, and it turns out that I might not be the greatest fiction writer. At least I wasn't at the time. So I started looking, and I kind of looked at some of the authors that I liked. One of them was Hunter S. Thompson. And Hunter S. Thompson, when he was first starting out, he wrote word for word Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea to get his style and to kind of understand how to write. He literally copied it word for word. So I turned to Hemingway for inspiration, and so I started reading a lot of him, and then doing kind of a deep dive into who he was. I learned that he started as a reporter, and I was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. So I started as a freelance reporter for Shreveport News, and then from there I joined the Daily Caller on a freelance basis out of D.C., doing a lot of foreign policy and national security stuff. Then I joined a kind of a small niche website called SoftRep, or News Rep at the time. It was called SoftRep. It was founded by a guy named Brandon Webb, who's a pseudo-famous Navy SEAL, and another guy named Jack Murphy, who's a good friend of mine, but he's a former Green Beret, now an investigative journalist and an author. So I worked for them doing a whole lot of stuff. I started doing finance work, finance writing, and that kind of led me into these kind of niche, low-intensity conflicts.
So then what brought you from Shreveport to this area? Because it was the Martinsburg job, or was it your wife?
So it was my wife's job. So I moved up here, and I did, I started working at the Daily Caller offices in Washington, D.C., and that's a hell of a commute. So I said, I don't think so. I can't do this. So I started working up in Martinsburg for the Journal.
And what does she do?
She's a physician, so she works in front row. Yeah. So we moved up here for her training. I mean, loved the area and loved the people she was working with, so we stayed.
Yeah, no, I can equate to the whole, like, a lot of downtime when your wife or girlfriend or whatever is going through schooling. Like, my wife went through PA school. Oh, wow. And not as intense as a physician, but I get it. So there's a lot of that downtime and learning how to, like, live life on your own. Yeah.
You're a bachelor, but not. So.
Exactly. Yeah, I get it. No, that's good. Well, I'm glad you guys settled in this area because we love the area, we love the town, and I'm sure you're kind of grown into that. So how have you grown into appreciating this part of the world?
For me, I think the biggest thing to kind of ground me to the area, because the first year I was working in DC, so I wasn't here a lot, and then the next 2 years I spent working nights for Amazon and then for a startup company. So I just didn't really get a chance to explore much. But so last year I decided to get a part-time job coaching basketball at Randolph-Macon, the JV team. And that was kind of my first, job in the community that kind of linked me to the community there in Front Royal. And I got to meet people and the parents. And that was kind of the way I guess it gave me the confidence to feel like I maybe belonged here, and I was a resident. I live here now. I'm giving back. I'm this is my home now.
Now, how long have you been here?
It'll be 5 years this year. Yeah.
And then landing a job where you are a reporter, a journalist, allows you to, like you said, cruise the area from Linden to Clearbrook, right?
Yeah.
That's your current territory. How do you find the stories? How do you come up with what you're writing about? Is that something that, as a freelance person, you do on your own, or does the newspaper kind of lead and guide and say, go on a hunt for this specific story?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little bit of both. So I have the freedom to pitch things to my editor. So I'll say, hey, I want to do a story about this, and she'll say yes or no. And then she'll also come back and say, hey, I want a story about this. Can you make it happen? And yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit of back and forth, and that's kind of, as the editor, that's their role to kind of decide what they want, and if you read the news in the Winchester Star, not only is it local news, but then editorial staff curates national and world news. So it's a balance of getting all those things in there.
Yeah, and it's almost a little bit of like news and reporting, but it's also kind of the feel-good stories, or let's talk about the people, let's talk about the town, let's talk about the events and activities. And so do you specialize in a specific genre, or are you just out there and looking for any story possible?
Yeah, so there's really, I guess, especially with local news, I'd say there's two types of stories. There's the meat and potatoes, like I'm going to the town council meeting, and I'm going to come back and tell you what they talked about. And then there's what you call the feel-good stories, the more in-depth, what in the business they called feature stories. I do a little bit of both. Now, as a freelancer, I do mostly features. So you and I talked a couple weeks ago about the real estate market, so that story actually comes out tomorrow.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
I did a story last week about a Ukrainian church in Front Royal that is, marking the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine. So things like that. Over Christmas, I kind of looked into some of the volunteer social service type things. So there's some really cool organizations out there that are offering support to, especially people with young children or the elderly, that we try to highlight. A lot of it is to let people know that, hey, these resources exist.
Yeah, and especially for a town of this size where, it's not a huge town. There's a lot of those kind of small, almost, I'd call them, I call them feel-good stories. But the stories that are going to energize you to be like, yes, Winchester is a great town, a great location. I'm sure you get a chance to see and meet a lot of people out there as well.
That's kind of the best too.
You seem like a people person.
Yeah, my editor in Martinsburg kind of said that I'm unique in the fact that I am more extroverted than introverted. A lot of reporters are more introverted. Apparently, I kind of am more outgoing, and I tend to form more personal relationships, especially when I interview people, for better or worse. I can't tell you if that makes it more effective or not.
I think it always does.
It's more engaging.
It definitely is more engaging, especially you have a personal aspect to it.
Especially there's a desire to get as much information as possible to write as good of a story as you can.
Yeah.
And just from speaking from personal experience, if you drew out more information from me, I'm going to be more inclined to share with you if you are also engaging with me as well. So there's the give and take that I think some people probably are scared of reporters, of what are you going to say?
Sure.
What are you going to twist? How are you going to twist my words to say what I'm not trying to say?
I'm curious. Do you have a story in all this time you've been doing it that just really kind of sticks with you? Like one of your favorite ones that you've done?
Yeah, you want to talk about up here, or I can
anywhere? Any story you've done.
It's a great question. I did one that I felt was pretty interesting in Martinsburg about an author up there who contacted us on a rainy day, and this kind of goes to what you're talking about. You kind of, when you go in, sometimes when I go into an interview, I'll have a few questions jotted down, and sometimes I don't have anything jotted down, and that whether it be laziness or it's my method, who knows. But this guy called the newspaper and he said, "Hey, I'm a writer, and I want you to write a story about me and the dark side of writing." My editor hands me this note, and he's like, "Hey, man, you got nothing going on. You want to go out there?" I was like, "Sure." So I go out there, and it ended up being a really kind of intense experience. Where I met a person who was obviously going through some kind of crisis. And you're in a strange house. And there's a bottle of booze and pills everywhere. It was really chaotic. And it was a really chaotic interview, and I was a little apprehensive, I guess, about being there. But I ended up sitting there for like 2 hours, and I wrote what I thought was a really good story about this guy. And then he contacted me like 2 months later and said, "Hey, why don't you come back out?" And he had a epiphany, I guess, and a lot of people had reached out to him to check on him, and he had, sobered up and cleaned up his house. Who knows how much he sobered up, but yeah, it was like a definite improvement. And he was like, "Hey, thanks for, writing about it." Until I saw it in print, I wasn't aware of how bad it was. So then I wrote another story about it was kind of like a fall and rise, which I thought was cool.
Yeah. It's not often that a newspaper journalist gets a chance to write a follow-up piece, I would imagine, where like there's kind of the before and after, or here's where it was before, and here's kind of a reaction to it. I would imagine that that's kind of appealing. It brings out the creative writer in you.
Yeah. And I'm really lucky. Like, it's such a hard business because, it's so hard to compete as a print media, just because of the speed of digital. So when you're on, the newspaper beat, you're trying to plan out your days and your stories, and there's just like not, there's only X amount of time in the day to go pursue these other things. So as a freelancer, I feel like I'm given a little bit of freedom to pursue things here.
So walk us through a day in the life of a journalist, a freelance reporter, even a week by week basis. So you mentioned that you do interviews, you talk to people. Then how long does it take to write the story? How long does it take for the story to get published? What does all that look like for you, and how many do you do in a week?
Okay. Yeah, it really depends on the week. I try to plan it out probably month by month. So, I work right now for the Winchester Star and the Northern Virginia Daily, but I also do a little bit of freelance work for a healthcare website called Epic Health.
Yep.
Doing feature stories about them. Okay. And I write for Reserve and National Guard magazine, just because when I was a local reporter in Shreveport, I started following the National Guard unit there, and then I ended up at National Guard magazine in D.C. working for the association. So that's kind of where I think I specialize, is understanding
some variety in your tool belt there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I write for them, and then I write, obviously for the local newspaper here. And then I recently did a story this year about an EMS helicopter crew in Panama City, Florida, which I actually wrote before I had a place to run it. But that was kind of fun. So, you really plan out, like, hey, these are the stories I'm going to run, or I'm going to write this month. And then you break it down. Like, so I have a story coming out. I have 2 stories coming out this month. One is about the Reserve and National Guard's role in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So I've been working on that story for a few months because it's taken a long time to track down veterans and things like that and do interviews. But then there's other stories, especially locally here, that I can do in a day or 2 days. And that's when you go out to the interview and you do it and you do a little bit of research and then you write it. And that's when you want to make sure that you have kind of at least a basic idea of what you're going to write about.
Right, because it goes by fast. Just those quick interviews, and then you process it, synthesize it, put it out there to where the general public can understand it.
Yeah.
And read it and gain some information.
What's helped me a lot, like when I first started, especially when I was reporting on the National Guard, because a lot of time in the field, I wasn't recording my interviews and I was trying to take notes and things like that. And then I would go back and I wouldn't be able to read my own handwriting. And I'd have to go back and confirm quotes. So having a recorder in your phone has been a super powerful tool.
Yeah. You mentioned speed of media
sure.
right now. And so we're talking the print media, and you mentioned digital.
Yeah.
So the digital media is a completely different animal, where things come out in minutes and hours, and here you're talking days, weeks, and months at a time. How do you see the industry morphing, and especially with that? Is the newspaper a dinosaur? Is magazine print a dinosaur? And how does that impact your life?
For my life, I'm lucky, right, that I have enough interest and experience writing in different media formats that I think, me personally, I feel like I'd be okay.
Right.
As far as the newspaper, its circulations are down and things like that. But in 2019, I probably would have been like, I think it's really dying. But, it's 2023 at this point. They have not died.
Still here.
Yeah. A lot of it, I think, comes down to the issue of funding. There's a lot of websites, especially national websites, news websites, that do not charge for their stories. And they are either like subsidized by foundations or large donations. So they're able to provide they're not essentially selling a product versus the newspaper. You're trying to get people to buy individual papers, and it's really a balance of providing a product that is value added.
Right.
And in this market where there's not a lot of media to begin with, it's a little bit easier for us.
Well, and what happens for us, the readers of Winchester Star, is we're learning about our town
Right.
through a newspaper print that we're not going to get digitally. We're not going to get through. There's no real true blog posts. Yes, Iconic Talk is one that you're going to get
That's
a lot
true.
of information and news about what's happening around town. But there's people lean on it, for sports stories of their kids, or for family members doing something fun and cool, or just any activity around town. It's still the source, I believe, for our area, which is a valuable tool.
I was really surprised by how many people that read it and would reach out to me and say like, "Hey, I wrote a story in December about a woman in Strasbourg who the last Wednesday of every night she goes to the laundromat in Strasbourg and she has a bag of quarters and she fills up everybody's laundry if they need it. It's called Laundry Love Night." And she said that, so I wrote a story about her, it was pretty quick, in and out, like 30 minutes. And she reached out to me and said, "Hey, someone read the story and, donated $100.
Aw.
So, it's a lot of,
Yeah.
like having that kind of impact, I was really surprised you're still able to have that kind of impact.
Yep.
And people do still get really excited about having their picture in the paper or, especially when I worked in Martinsburg, people would call me like, "Hey, my kid is like a Rhodes Scholar or something." And those are fun, and I think that those stories, whether they, there is that if it bleeds, it leads stereotype, but there is
Right.
something to say about celebrating, the successes in our town. And, it's kind of the beauty of living in a small town.
Yeah.
At least I, and I think a lot of other people want to celebrate the successes of my neighbors. That's kind
And
of
you
why
don't want to
here.
look at
Right.
all the horror stories around the world that you can get
Yeah.
any other outlet. Let's look at celebrate the lives and celebrate the community as best as possible. And I think the Star does that.
I think so too.
I will say I handed in a story about that Ukrainian church.
Yeah.
And the first 500 words were about like the 1930s Holodomor genocide in Ukraine. And my editor was like, "Hey, we don't need that."
Yeah. Yeah.
This is supposed to be a feel-good story. Not
Right.
so there is, we do have a really good editorial staff.
That's great. Yeah.
What's your process when you actually sit down to write? Is it all just kind of come out of you?
I like to transcribe the interview first. I worked with a woman in Martinsburg named Bree, and she really taught me that, like, the power of transcribing, and that's kind of where the story is. So I used to write the story and kind of transcribe and try to plug in quotes, and now I transcribe the whole interview first, and then I kind of go back and see what I have. It's almost like treasure hunting. Like when I was a kid, growing up in Florida, there was a lot of excitement because a guy named Mel Fisher had discovered like the Atocha gold from this sunken Spanish galleon, like in the golden age of sail.
Yeah.
And they had done it. And so it was like everywhere where I lived was all this stuff about how he did it in these massive air blowers. And, he would really grab like a lot of the seabed, pull it up, and they have to sift through it. And sometimes it can feel like that when you're doing an interview and we'll talk for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then you're like, "Oh, but I got 20 minutes of like a really amazing story." And then, you also, if you talk to somebody for 2 hours, like, I'm proud of the fact that most people I interview or interact with professionally, I have a good relationship with afterwards.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but I definitely try to make that a priority.
Yeah, that's valuable, and I can see that again in your personality, being an extrovert and liking to talk to people. That's again, I can't emphasize enough. That's helpful for just sharing a story for people to learn a human interest story, to understand the community better, to appreciate the town. There's a value added there. So instead of just somebody looking for the negative.
Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that you have ADHD and you kind of go with your daydreams. I have it too, and I totally get that concept because when you dream, it's like watching a movie in your head. It is the coolest thing. There's so many positives to ADHD, but when you mention how you take notes and you can't go, when you go back, you can't read them. I snickered a little because I'm so guilty of that because you do it and you write it down quick and you miss letters and you're moving on to the next thing and it's funny. So I think it's a special little superpower is what I think ADHD is.
My mom thinks that she's like severely dyslexic, and she sees beauty in that as well. She was a elementary school teacher, so obviously that it's cool that someone with that kind of disability can overcome that. And, it's interesting how we all see the world differently.
There's hope for everyone, and there's a job for everyone.
That is true.
Specific skills. So we here at Iconic Talk, we haven't always done this recently, but we have 3 now. We used to have 5, so be lucky. 3 iconic questions
Cool.
that we like to ask each of our guests.
Yeah, I got plenty of time, so you guys...
We are here for it. So the first question is just what do you like about your local neighborhood where you currently live now?
I like that there's a lot of young families. I like that my neighbor and I, even though like we're not hanging out, I like that we're friendly and I know him and I know that. So when I was, kind of go back, when I was in New Orleans, I lost a house to an arson fire, which was really traumatic, and it left me with a lot of residual anxiety about leaving my house because you come back and someone has firebombed it or whatever.
Yeah.
It was not like I just want to be clear, it was not like a retaliation against me. It was like an insane person, but it was still very traumatic. And it was the second time I've lost everything I own because in 2004 we lost our house to Hurricane Francis.
Oh, goodness.
So what I really like about where I live is that I know that if something was to happen in my house and I wasn't there, I'd get a phone call. And there's enough people around that I feel like we're all safe kind of together.
Yep.
And that makes me feel really good because I haven't necessarily had that. I really like my neighbors in New Orleans and I really like my neighbors in Shreveport, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was the safest place to be.
Different vibe here.
Yeah.
Love it. Second question. Megan, go for it.
What's your favorite local restaurant?
That's a great question. Can I do each? I'll do each town if you'd like.
Fire away.
Should I go up? Okay, so
that way you're not gonna just isolate one.
Well, so I'll offend everybody.
Right. Sure.
Because then it'll be why didn't you pick me? So I think in Woodstock, it's got to be Mary Botanita's, the new like authentic Mexican place. I think it's one of the best Mexican places I've been to.
Yep.
Strasburg, I'd have to say Pancake Underground. I really like the chicken and waffles that they do. They do like a really cool apple barbecue chicken, and I don't know, I'm a geek for local food like that. Like I still cook like jambalaya and stuff from when I was in New Orleans, and I love that when places up here like incorporate like apples and things like, as simple as it is, like I love that we have a food.
A local culture.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like I didn't grow up in Florida. Like I didn't have like a food.
Florida doesn't have a food.
Right.
I don't think. Right.
Key lime pie, maybe in the Keys. Natty ice beer. Like I guess like cheap
maybe
discussion.
Fish tacos. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's more California.
Yeah.
Sure.
But in Strasburg would be Pancake Underground. In Front Royal, I'm gonna go with Vibrissa, the brewery. They brought in a new chef a while ago, and
they brought one here to Winchester.
And that one's awesome. And I really like what they're doing with the menu, and I think the beer's great. I think we are really lucky to have such a good craft beer scene here. Going up to Winchester, my favorite place here. It's a tough one. I'm gonna go with Water Street Kitchen
Downtown.
Yeah,
there you go.
If you were to ask me like, hey, where do you want to go? I'd be like, let's go to Water Street.
Let's go walk down the street.
And then what have I missed?
Is there anything north near the Clearbrook or even
There's
the Martinsburg area or Inwood?
I really wish I knew the name of the restaurant. It is in Clearbrook, but they do a peanut butter and jelly chicken wing. And when I used to work nights at Amazon, there'd be a few of us who we would normally order food every night. And I've gotten the peanut butter and jelly chicken wings.
There's some homework for you.
Yeah.
For all the listeners, let us know
Find
what
the
that
peanut
is.
butter and jelly chicken wings.
And try it. It's be adventurous.
Oh, awesome. And third and final question, you've already touched on this, but give us just one final take. What's something that you think makes our area special?
Oh, there's so much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a great place to live. I'll say this, it's such an easy place to live. We're not boarding up our house 6 months out of the year, which, as a kid, it becomes something that you're used to. But now as an adult who has elderly parents back in Florida, it's something that I am very cognizant of how hard that is.
Yeah.
So it's a very easy place to live. The weather is great. The infrastructure is, in my opinion, like pretty decent. Coming from Louisiana, which, right, wrong, or different. Especially when I lived in New Orleans, I had friends that would come down and they'd be like, "Hey, it looks like you live in the third world."
Yeah.
And I love it, but it like legitimately does look, with all the potholes and things. So I love the infrastructure down here, and then like the amalgamation of people. We have some great. It's such a cool microcosm of, people that have been in this area for hundreds of years, and then people that are brand new to this area. But I feel like there's so many people that come to this area that bring like a lot with
It's like
them.
a melting pot.
Yeah.
Of sorts, especially more recently with people moving into town and not many people moving out of town.
Yeah.
So we're getting this kind of more merging
Right.
of local Winchester community that's maybe different than it might have been 25 years ago.
Right. And I think, I hope at least that it continues to be
Yep.
a successful merge. And I feel like, at least for my part, I feel like I was welcomed when I first moved here. I didn't feel like there was a lot of localism or tribalism,
Yeah.
which I think, growing up in Florida, surfers are like, that's a big thing is tribalism and protecting of where you're from. And if, you don't know, it's a big thing. And I kind of expected it to be that way when I moved up here. And I was a little bit afraid, and I was really overwhelmed with how everyone was like, oh, hey, welcome. And we're just glad you're here.
Yeah. Well,
welcome.
that
And-
speaks to it.
And we're
There
glad
you go.
you're here.
We're glad you're here. Well, just is there anything that you wanted to promote about yourself or about your career? We like to always give people an opportunity for that. So feel free. As realtors, we like to give out our information.
Yeah, we do.
But you might not. So I'll give you the opportunity and freedom to share whatever you want to share about promoting what you do.
You could follow me on Twitter at LaFave Joseph. I'm not super active. I'm just like not that great at Twitter. Some people really excel in that medium. I'm not one of them. You can follow me there. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I'd like to keep doing more work, both with the local media here and with the Reserve and National Guard magazine. So I've been in talks with the public affairs officer for the Virginia National Guard about doing some stories about the unit up here in Winchester.
Cool.
I think that is super important for people in the community to know like a lot about what their local National Guard unit can do. Again, coming from Louisiana and Florida,
Right.
My first memories of the National Guard were them in Humvees bringing my mom and I bags of ice, when there's no power.
Right.
And it's when you really get into that microcosm, that is really a great glimpse of the community. Like if you really want to take a look at like who all lives in this spot, take a look at the Guard unit, because you're going to have folks from every walk of life, every race, every political view, and it's fantastic. And I'd really like to start highlighting the work they do.
Cool.
And highlight some of the folks, not only the work they do in the Guard, but the work they do here in the community, because seems to be a common thing with guardsmen where they don't just serve 2 days a month and 2 weeks a year. They seem to be people in the community that do things here on their off time that give back as well, whether it be coaching or working for the civil service or things like that.
Yeah, well, you can keep doing what you're doing because it's definitely a benefit to our community. Winchester Star is lucky to have you. Our town is lucky to have you. Keep promoting our town and just sharing the good around the world. So thanks so much for being here. We love having you, and just
that was great.
Yes, keep telling us more about what you've got going on down the road. Thanks, Joe.
Awesome.
Well, that was fascinating because I love hearing behind the scenes conversations for really any industry.
Right, me too.
But the newspaper journalism kind of industry is always kind of an unknown thing. Especially the question that I really wanted to get was, how do you come up with these stories? And he was able to unpack that very openly. So
in his history and kind of how he got into the business, and really fascinating, especially to go from a degree in criminology and being an EMT to a freelance writer.
Yeah,
so it was really great.
It just shows that over time you can use your personality and your skills and your giftedness and your kind of passions, and do it something to make a living.
I'm wondering if there's going to be a book in his future.
That's what I was thinking too. I didn't want to go down that path, but I really saw that's an option down the road. If he starts continuing to get kind of more niche in his freelance options, and he's like, oh, I have some more time, squirrel away.
Right.
You never know. But I haven't mentioned my grandmother in a long time on our podcast, but she is one who has gravitated to the Winchester Star. And she obviously is of that generation where, reading the newspaper every day is a thing, which there's plenty of people in our generation, even younger, that do it. But she says, I love this newspaper. She's like, I learned so much. She's like, this is way better than my small town Florida newspaper where I came from. And she'll read it every single day from front to cover, and she'll be the one who informs me on things that I might have missed in
Now,
the paper.
did you still get the hard copy of the newspaper prior to her moving in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it still comes to our back porch alley. It's there, and I know it's changing, and they're getting delivered with the postal service instead of the actual just delivery men early in the mornings. But so instead of reading it with her breakfast, she'll maybe read it with her lunch. So
Well, that's okay.
That's perfectly fine.
As long as you're still getting it.
As long as we're still getting it.
Yep.
Well, speaking of our town and small town things and our community, what is going on for this coming week and weekend?
So coming up tonight at 6 p.m. is an annual Rent-A-Hand auction and spaghetti dinner the Sharando FFA is putting on. A dinner is a free will offering at the Sharando High School cafeteria. There is also a Patsy Cline Remembrance Weekend. That's Saturday from 10 to 4 and Sunday from 10 to 1 at the Historic House on Kent Street. That's Patsy Cline's home where she grew up.
Awesome.
And at the Shenandoah Memorial Park Cemetery. There's also a bluegrass concert that's coming up on Saturday from 7 to 10:30. Junior Sisk and Terry Bokum's Dukes of Drive. That's going to be at the Clark County High School to benefit the school.
So I guess that would be outside, I'm assuming.
I don't know.
Maybe it's inside.
Maybe it's inside. I'm not sure. It'll
Yeah.
be somewhere at Clark County High School.
Benefit the school too. Yep.
And there's also a low-cost dog and cat vaccines. That's Wednesday, March 8th from 4 to 6 p.m. It's cash only. Helps keep the prices low. That's on 310 North Buckmarsh, if I can read today.
Yeah.
Buckmarsh Street in Berryville. They do recommend appointments. This is just a really cool thing. You can get a rabies shot for $10, December shot for $15, Bordetella 18, microchips for $20. Those are great deals. Anybody that has pets,
A chip? You can get a chip for $20?
a microchip for $20.
You got to do that for your dog.
Yeah, if nothing else,
We
it's-
chipped our dog. I mean,
We did too.
must have, because you never know. She'll go rogue and run down the street. Who knows what'll happen.
Yeah,
So.
these are really great prices. So if you're looking for any of those needs, that's going to be March 8th.
Awesome.
In Berryville.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Those are some really diverse and fun, unique things coming up here.
I agree.
So I love it. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Iconic Talk, and we hope you learned something from today's episode. Look forward to sharing more with you next week. Remember, when you're looking for a real estate professional, make sure they are experienced, innovative, personal, dedicated, and available.
We appreciate you spending some of your valuable time with us. We can be found on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends.
There you go. And thanks to our editor extraordinaire, Simeon Battaglia. Until next time, think iconic.